Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us. This is the first webinar in the fall 2021 session of the Caribou Ecology and Recovery webinar series. The series is co-hosted by the Caribou Monitoring Unit and National Boreal Caribou Knowledge Consortium and sponsored by the Regional Industry Caribou Collaboration. We have a really great schedule that I've thrown up here on the screen for you to see, so I'm really excited to get started. Before we do that though, I just want to go over some housekeeping to remind you of how things work here in the webinar series. Everybody will be muted, so please make sure you're muted on your side as well. You can ask a question in the chat or question bar section of the kind of control panel. And we will moderate a question and answer section at the end. We'll aim for about 10 to 15 minutes of questions. If we don't get to your question, you can also follow up with us directly or with the presenter. Tatiana Flick from NBC-KC is here to help you. If you need any IT support, just let us know in the chat if you're having issues. Only the moderators and presenters can see the chat, so you don't have to worry about kind of airing out that dirty laundry. The webinar will be recorded and posted on the CMU website. We've also kept all of the recordings online for folks to view at your own pace and leisure. So that's at cmu.abmi.ca. And with that, we can go ahead and get started, and I will pass it over to Katherine. So Katherine, you should have just received the prompt.
Perfect.
Awesome. Looks and sounds great.
Okay, perfect. So good morning, everyone. I'm Katherine Wolfenden. I'm the Land and Resource Coordinator at Fort Nelson First Nation. I've been here going into 11 years now, working for the Lands Office. And so today I wanted to talk to you guys about basically our holistic approach to habitat restoration in our territory. And it's really a story for us, by us, all nation led and driven for our presentation. So today I'm going to get right into a project video first. I think it'll set the stage to give you some good visuals and background information on our this project video. Basically focuses more on our Cacho Lake project, and all the filming and work is done by Ryan Dickey from Winterhawks Image, who is an FNFN band member and extremely talented. So I'll just switch over to YouTube. Hi, I'm Katherine Wolfenden. I'm the Land and Resource Coordinator for Fort Nelson First Nation Lands Office.
Let's see what we get. Give it some dimensions.
We are located near Cacho Lake, northeast of Fort Nelson, and we are currently at one of our restoration sites on our Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation project.
47 just about it.
In year one, we conducted restoration treatments. In the fall time, we wanted to try and see if we could do the work that most places are doing in the winter, but conduct the same work in the fall under unfrozen conditions. One of the techniques that we wanted to try out on our project was to basically look at transplanting whole hummocks, so living matter onto the line rather than some methods of kind of building the hummocks online and flipping them off. We really just wanted to create a more easy, natural look to these lines rather than some of the harsher restoration techniques that have been done so far.
0.95.
So we have a pretty in-depth vegetation monitoring program, and really what we're trying to do is compare vegetation response to treatment online and then what the natural state of the vegetation offline is. So we're looking at terminal growth of trees, vegetation coverage online and offline, hummock size, and then we're also looking at the moisture content and the pH of the sites. And there's definitely the notion and the evidence behind linear features and kind of the ease and quickness of how wolves are moving across the landscape and how side declines have opened a lot of habitat to increase the predation on caribou. And so we're hoping through projects like this that we can start to erase some of those linear features and definitely to find a site. FNFN has a lot of partnerships and funders to make this work successful, and some of those are Environment Canada, HCTF, and then we also have a very close working with our group, as well as Swamp Donkey, and they really help make sure that we get the field work and the data analysis done. So we've heard from the members of Fort Nelson First Nation for a number of years that they really want to see the land restored back to how it was before industry. We're definitely supporters of responsible and sustainable development, but we do want to see some of these old legacy lands that aren't utilized for winter access or any other purposes to start to be restored where they make sense. And we really view that these are the types of projects that work not only environmentally and culturally, but also for our members. Perfect. So that is basically just an idea for everyone to kind of get caught up to date on some of the visuals of what the project looks like on the ground. I also have some photos and stuff that we'll go through later. But really I'll dive into now into kind of where we came from, the beginning of it, and really what led a lot of this work was in 2017, kind of response to the provincial plan is FNFN created our own MEDSI action plan. And so that people are aware, MEDSI is the Dene word for caribou. And really the idea around our plan is that we wanted to spatially identify areas for habitat for protection and restoration. And we thought that was something that was definitely missing from some of the current plans, was that spatial identification of the areas. And this is just a quick restoration timeline, kind of, you know, where a snapshot of FNFN and how we've been involved over the past number of years, basically since I started working in 2011. Just the different projects, you know, planning, regulatory review projects, monitoring, restoration work. So we've really built up our capacity over the years to ensure that we're setting ourselves up for success in doing this work. So I guess, you know, when we started looking at caribou and understanding that we had such a problem and we really wanted to find a solution, we realized that we needed to prioritize the landscape. Just to put in perspective, FNFN's core territory covers over 85% of the boreal caribou habitat in BC. So that's a lot of area, and we can't start with everything all at once. So we knew we had to come up with a prioritization scheme. And really what we wanted to focus on was areas of high cultural importance. Where are the areas that members have told us over the years that are important for caribou, the type of habitat, the movement corridors, calving areas, things like that. We also wanted to look obviously at habitat condition, and a big driver for this work as well is the tenuring. A lot of the land is tenured, so where is there less tenure that makes doing some of this restoration work a little bit easier? And then obviously seismic line, proximity to pipeline, and then wolf use of the area, which when we first started there was some more current wolf coloring data. So out of that came our first area, which was priority number 1, which was the Cacho Lake restoration area. So you can see on the map there, it's obviously located by Cacho Lake up in Fort Nelson. And it really came out on top because of the high density of conventional seismic lines, as well as a lot of the early day low impact seismic lines, which for people that have been on the ground, you can tell that I wouldn't classify them as low impact. They're still fairly high impact. There's a lot of caribou use in the area, both from the color data as well as FNFN traditional knowledge that we use. And also this area is interesting is that a lot of the exploration and current development of that area is turning off, and it really, the type of gas and oil resources there really show a low likelihood of future development, which means it's a great restoration candidate. The second area, which we have coined the Medzi 10A, which is Dene for Caribou's Trail, which is a very fitting name for this area. So if anyone's familiar with Fort Nelson, you're going to go out on the SYD road, which is the main industry road. And then basically this encompasses along the 61 road area, which is obviously it's still in Snake Sautney range. And it also has high levels of seismic line coverage, but also fairly low producing wells. So it's also an interesting area to look at in the world of the tenuring and ease. Again, it's also an area of high historical and current caribou use. We're seeing that a lot in the coloring data as well as just in our member observations in the area. And so our approach to restoration, it's something that's important to the nation and has been important for a number of years. Since I started, I've been hearing nonstop from members that they really do want to see some restoration. And it really came out of years of witnessing, unplanned development. There was a lot of frustration in the early days with industry and just kind of the boom and bust cycle that the land was seeing. Now, Fort Nelson, we're in a steep economic downturn, and we have been for a number of years and probably will continue to be in a depressive state for quite a while. So really, we saw restoring the land as an opportunity, both environmentally and economic. The benefits there are really starting to be seen. And so really our approach is the holistic approach. We want to look at all the values equally and figure out how can we solve this problem that we've been left with. So we're seeing our involvement in restoration from beginning to end. So right from the site selection, planning, doing the work, right, continuing on down to monitoring. And I think this is just another thing about why the holistic approach is we've got some more Western science thoughts about seismic line restoration, and then we really wanted to come through and give it more of an FNFN approach. So softer touches, more natural look and feel. We really want restoration to fit in with the surrounding forest. And that whole idea about respecting all values. We know that, especially in the Cacho Lake area, you still have moose using the areas, you have caribou, bear, you name it, there's quite a bit of variety of animals there. So we really wanted that softer approach and looking at things even such as shallow groundwater and just figuring out how can we do the best job and still make an impact on the line. So this was some of our goals is we really wanted that low impact approach. We wanted to be quick and efficient. and have the ability to take some of these trials that we're doing now and then be able to scale them up into the future. And then obviously we want some of the research is some quick things, we want to know, are the plants growing? Are the animals responding how we want? And then also a big goal for us is the cost. We hear a lot over and over again from proponents saying we can't do restoration or we can't do it this way because it's too much and it's too expensive. It costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we really wanted to show and prove that you can do things efficiently and effectively up in Fort Nelson. And so this is more on Cacho Lake. So Cacho Lake was a summer, or I'd call it a fall program. So really we were doing it in unfrozen conditions, which is extremely hard working in the muskeg, but we wanted to try it to see if we could and what we could learn from it. So really we focused on transplanting hummocks, free planting, the tree falling and bending work, and then we even tried some rototilling, which did not work. And then in the Medsitene, which is kind of over in the 61 area, this was done in frozen conditions. So we really wanted to mimic the work that we'd been doing up in Cacho, but can we do that now in frozen and see just how much more quicker and efficiently we could do. So really we were still, dealing with the access issue, which is always unfortunately an issue when you're dealing with restoration. But really we just took the best of what worked from Cacho Lake and really brought it down into this area. And I guess getting into the planning side of things is selecting the lines, which is really important. There's a ton of lines, as you can see from the lines around Cacho Lake, is where do you start? It can be a little overwhelming when you pull up GIS and you look at all these lines, but really you can't treat everything. So we've had to come up with how do we arrange the treatments on the landscape to get basically the best bang for buck. We wanted to start to look at different qualities of lines. Not every line is equal. So we kind of ranked the different types of seismic lines. And we really focused a lot of the treatments at these intersections because I think that they're good key places to cut off movement options for the predators. And when you look at some of these intersections that have multiple lines meeting into them, they really are quite large. So here's some photos of our summer fall treatment. This is the first year up in Cacho Lake. And this is really, we're focusing on transplanting the whole hummocks from adjacent line and then putting them on. And we were really doing a comparing for just putting them on versus scraping some of the material off first with the mini hoe and then placing the hummocks on. So this shows basically, what we're looking at. So we have a before photo on the left and then kind of the after of our hummock transplanting. We also did free plant, so where we basically just planted black spruce seedlings directly into the muskeg, and then also tree bending and tree hinging along the line to basically soften the edge effect of the seismic line. And I think the photo on the far right shows really about these intersections and that I think they're a very important area to just on a line of sight to start blocking the areas off and really focus some of your treatment dollars in this area. So this is some of the other equipment we use, obviously an Argo, because we're working in such wet areas and it's unfrozen. Year 2, we tried something called an all-track machine, which is there on the right. It fared okay, but I wouldn't say, it's as efficient as an Argo moving around in this type of area. We had to stick with using mini excavators just for weight and weight distribution. We're still to this day looking for the best type of equipment. Some people are using kind of those big trucks or the fat trucks is what they call. I'm still not sold on whether or not that's going to work in some of these areas. They are extremely challenging to get through, unfortunately. And just another example of kind of what some of the hinged and transplanted mounds, this is more at eye level. And then we get into our winter work. So this is our winter project that we just did this last winter. We had an opportunity through the Forest Employment Program through FLNRO to get some funding to trial out our Cacho Lake restoration techniques, but obviously in frozen conditions. So we still did a lot of the same treatments of, transplanting the whole mounds and then falling and hinging trees. We didn't do any tree planting just because I don't know how effective tree planting in the winter really is. We're still looking into that, but on an operational side, it just is more headache than good, I think. So we did have to size up on our excavator size, just because obviously now we're dealing with digging through frozen muskeg, so you do need a little bit bigger power. And then we used a snowcat for crew transportation, but also what we found is that you can burn a lot of time moving equipment back and forth. So we kind of just created a little barge, I guess, for the mini excavator, and then we just pulled that and dredged it along up to the next site so that we didn't have to wait. I mean, if anyone's seen a mini hoe move, it takes a long time to get anywhere. So this is one of the efficiencies that we were able to do to just cut our time. And this is what it looks like kind of once it's actually put in place, the hummocks. So we obviously trialed again looking at scraping, so scraping away the snow, as well as just putting the hummocks directly onto the line. And this is some of the hinging and bending as well in the winter. Because they're frozen, we were able to push a lot of them over just with the excavator, versus when we were doing the fall treatments, we had to use slashers because of the mini hoe size was just too small to bend over a lot of the trees up in Cacho Lake. This is just some aerial photos. You can see that when we do a treatment of the line, generally we will treat heavily where you can see the bands of trees, and then more out into the open muskeg, we were leaving those as non-treatments because you get into a lot thinner frost issues. So you get into more safety issues with equipment potentially falling through the muskeg, which we are trying to avoid. And then just some summary on some numbers. So Cacho Lake, we've done 2 years of treatment. So 2019, we did 10 kilometers with 10 days. 4-person team, I think, is the big thing to note there, that these are small crews and we're still able to deliver, generally a kilometer-ish a day. And then 2020, we were able to do 13.4 kilometers treated. This is both in unfrozen ground conditions. And again, we used a 4-person team for that. Very hard to move around. You spend a lot of time just between the treatment sites, moving and figuring out, can I go down this line safely in this machine? Do I need to cut corduroy for the equipment so that I can get over, an area of kind of more swampy looking area? We have cameras located at both of the treatment sites as well, and I'll get into that in a little bit. We also trialed 2019 was a fly-in, fly-out operation versus 2020 we set up a remote camp. That's another cost factor when looking at some of these restoration projects, is just what are you doing with the crew, where are they staying, and how are they getting back and forth every day from accommodations to the actual restoration site. And then just a little summary of our Mezzitene area. So this was winter last year, 7.6 kilometers treated, 5 days, and we were able to cut it down to a 3-person team. Just getting down to efficiency, people running more than one type of equipment, ensuring job responsibility with the right people, so that you can really get a tight-knit small crew. And honestly, by the end of it, I think we were just down to myself and the hoe equipment operator. So we got down to a 2-person team at the end of the winter when we kind of, got into the swing of things. So really same thing with Mezzitene, was just comparing, same techniques, but just winter conditions. And I'll touch base on some of the monitoring vegetation work that we've done to date. So a big goal for FNFN is monitoring. Really our thing is there's no point in doing this restoration work if you're not going to monitor, and if you're not going to monitor long term, because things can change from year 1 to year 2 to year 3 so quickly. So in Cotcho Lake, we were able to establish 87 long-term plots, able to remeasure 110 in 2011 after we added more in 2020. As well as Medsutene, we set up 233 long-term monitoring plots, and then a bunch of tree bending plots as well. We were able to go back this July and do some monitoring to look at where things are at. And so we really wanted to look at hummocks. And what we wanted to look on those was some of the questions we asked is obviously the target tree growth. Basically, did every transplanted mound, did the tree grow? When it comes to the actual hummock itself, has it collapsed? Yes or no? And then are they anchoring? So is the transplanted hummock anchoring and growing into the line? And we really wanted to strive on getting our monitoring techniques down to something fairly simple and straightforward without tons of data sheets and obtuse measurements that really don't matter. At the end of the day, are the trees growing? Do things look happy, healthy? Yes or no? Because going forward, a lot of the monitoring work is going to be done by your FNFN guardians. So we've been looking for a rapid approach to monitoring these sites. And so some of the data so far, this is all the data is going to be shown is from the Cotcho Lake, just because we have more of that. Basically, the take home from all the data is the trees are surviving. They're not doing as well as the trees on the adjacent hummocks, obviously in the natural conditions, but things are going well. The terminal growth's growing, everything's looking good so far. Then we've got the hummocks transplants. So basically the same thing. We were looking at what about the dimensions of the hummocks. Basically, they did settle, but they're still staying intact over time. So we're not seeing crumbling and dissolving of the hummocks, as they still are staying their nice intact solid forms. As well as this is what we're talking about, looking at the anchoring. Then again, everything's still looking good there. It's pretty neat to come back to these sites and see the moss just growing in on itself, being happy. There's obviously a trauma response the first year generally where things are still in shock from the transplant, but it looks like overall they are recovering and continuing to grow. Then there's the death piles. So death piles are created basically when you're doing the scraping work. The hoe essentially now creates this new death pile. So it's a byproduct anyways of the mound construction. So we wanted to monitor that and see, are they doing good things or not good things for the line. So, they are working and they're keeping their structure over time too, which is good. We were worried about the potential of the moss drying out and just kind of blowing away, but it actually seems like things are going quite well. So you can see there's anchoring, there's live moss. So we're getting promising results so far, considering they are just a scraping and byproduct of restoration. And then we've got the free-planted seedlings, which I'm super excited about. Honestly, a free-planted seedling is literally just a seedling plopped into on the line, basically at the best micro target planting spot. So more than 80% of the free-planted black spruce survived to year 3, which is, I think, a pretty good survival rate. The first year we did plant black spruce and tamarack, just because that's all we could get from the nursery, and we wanted to see what would happen. Very few of the tamarack seedlings survived, so we're only reporting on black spruce here for this presentation. It was something that we noted, and it's hard to say, is it tamarack in general or is it the seedlings that we got? The seedlings weren't 100% excellent, but it's hard to say, but we've definitely seen the success in black spruce, so I think we've just continued on only using black spruce now. Here's another one just showing, you know, the growing seasons. Basically, you know, there's significantly more growth in the free plants compared to the adjacent naturally growing stems in year one, but then, you know, it starts to taper off in year two. And that's likely due to, you know, some residual nutrients left in the plugs of the seedlings. And then we've got our wildlife camera program. So throughout the KLRA, we've got a bunch of wildlife cameras. Right now, we have 7 control cameras and then 12 treatment cameras set up. So here's just the photo, and this is a good distribution map showing the different treatment locations as well as the project. So here's some of the wildlife response and what we see on the cameras. What we can tell is obviously it's an important area for caribou. Caribou's the green top line. They are showing up in basically every single camera. Overall, you know, it's promising data to suggest that treatments will help recover the area and, you know, prevent increased numbers of moose and wolves, but obviously it's still fairly early in the day and it is just a small subset of cameras. Here's some of the photos. We've been really lucky to get some really great photos off of them that have really shown the diversity of animal use in the area. Tons of sandhill cranes and other small critters, as well as these great groups of caribou that we're seeing. And we're definitely seeing some observations of larger groups of caribou in the fall winter, which coincides with what community members have told us about how caribou are using this area. And then we also do some winter survey flights. So basically we've taken the KLRA and divided it into 72 10-kilometer squared hexagons, and that we survey 1 to 6 times flying throughout those. And basically we're surveying for mammals and, you know, anything marten-sized and larger. And we have found quite a few throughout the years. And here's just a table, you know, summary of what we've seen. Basically, the take-home message again is that there's lots of animals, lots of use in this area. It's important habitat, and really confirms that it's an important area for restoration work to really obtain those multiple goals. This is just a summary of the years and the detections. You know, it's a useful method to look at wildlife response to treatments at a scale because it is larger than the line itself. Obviously, we need more data, you know, to look at how the patterns are changing over the years. So it's something that we are looking for is to continue to monitor this area over a significant period of time. Just some key learnings for other folks that are interested in looking at doing this work. Equipment is very valuable, and choosing the right equipment for the job is something that we found really hard to do. So this is the Haglund. This was what was used first year. Haglund is actually a military piece of equipment that's supposedly unsinkable, amphibious, super great in the muskeg. We got all these raves that it would be the right fit for the job. And I think this was like day 3 or something, and it disappeared half through the muskeg and turned into this really great operation of getting the piece of equipment out of the muskeg. So we learned then that we needed to look for some different types of equipment to move throughout the project and move our equipment. Another thing is just try things. I mean, the idea of what we're doing right now is honestly wonky, of digging up, you know, these 2-meter tall spruce trees and plopping them down on the lines. But until you try it, you don't know. Case in point is the rototiller on the left. It worked for all of 5 seconds before it was completely bound by roots and useless. And that was just something we wanted to try in some of these areas we're getting heavier grass infill. Is could you basically essentially rototill and rip up some of that grass to let some of the other species in. And monitoring, you know, build it into the work that you're doing so that you can respond quicker to what you're seeing. You know, you need to learn and adjust as you go and fairly quickly. Some of the other key learnings is down to the planning work. And it's extremely hard to find some of the areas that don't have industrial tenures on them and that are still suitable for treatment. Basically to kind of get our programs going and you know, as little admin snags as possible is that we do target untenured areas so that we can, you know, avoid some of that delay, because sometimes with the funding cycles, we don't have a lot of time between receiving the funding and needing to do the work. Another thing as well is the permitting. There is no permits, as everyone knows, to do restoration work. So our work is done through an occupant license to cut. And the Flynn Row office here has been really great to kind of get a system that's worked out well for us. So how we do it is we apply for basically a treatment zone rather than each line specifically. And then we just update them where we're at, because having a zone rather than a specific line gives us that operational movement that if we run into something in the field, we can switch a line or we can switch, you know, the treatment type. So that's worked out quite well over the years. One of the other things that we've learned, and we knew going into it, but until you kind of see from GIS to actually on the ground, is obviously the line status information. So that's really the tool that you use is, you know, you open GIS and you look at all the data that's supposedly this great database. But unfortunately, a lot of it's incorrect, it's wrong. Some of the lines aren't actually there, some are. So basically right now our current approach is kind of, we have to fly the whole target restoration area with a helicopter and then kind of assess accessibility, how we want to treat, where we want to treat. What we're looking at now, because it's obviously expensive, is we're looking at using drones to develop an approach that's more cost effective and can provide, you know, at least as much detail as the helicopter flights provide already. So we're looking at using drone imagery to build, you know, both a photo map of the lines that we scout, but also a three-dimensional model of the vegetation along the lines. And then we're going to relate, you know, hopefully that drone captured data to what we see in the field, and then build a drone-based metrics to assess if line can and should be treated. So we're really lucky that we have one of our guardians, and that's Wyatt. So he's, you know, got his advanced drone operator license. So it's just another capacity building thing that the nation has done to really make sure that we're successful and able to do this work ourselves, because I think he's the only one in the Fort Nelson area with that certification. And then obviously all the insurances that need to go with it as well is another admin hurdle that you need to be aware of. And then the next steps is we're doing what we're doing. We're still out there restoring. We have switched our Cocho Lake project to a winter restoration this year because of some of the safety and efficiency that we're seeing. Is we're just going to try a winter program. FNFN was also able to access the legacy fund money, so we will be kind of going full steam as well with that this winter in our Medzi 10A restoration area, and really focusing on taking the work that we did last year and basically scaling it up to accomplish even more restoration. And then that's it for the presentation. And I've got myself, Jesse, and Susan's contact information up there. If you have questions that we end up not getting time to talk to today, or you just have questions, feel free to email any of us about them. And obviously thank you to our funders over the years and all our partners to really make this work a success to date.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That was really interesting. And the visuals were quite powerful. So thank you for being the first one to go up this fall. A reminder to all our participants to please enter any questions you might have in the questions box or the chat, and we will moderate. We do have a few already, so I'll go ahead and start asking those. The first one I'd like to ask you, Catherine, is what would you say are your biggest learnings, and what do you see as the biggest hurdles moving forward?
Perfect. So I think the learnings is taking a different approach. Is that we were seeing projects that we didn't like, and instead of just saying we don't like your projects, is we really went back and said, no, we can do it better. We know the area the best. So that was the big learning for us, is that we're capable. We have the capacity, we have the knowledge, we're able to do it. I think the biggest hurdles is honestly still dealing with the tenure piece, and it is a hard conversation with government and industry. Is there's so much area out there to restore, but if someone is renting a tenure underneath a subsurface tenure, having that conversation about what can and can't happen for restoration on the surface is unfortunately still a fairly difficult conversation that we're working on, but the guidance isn't very clear, I think, from government.
Great, thank you. The next question here is, did you plant into the duff piles?
Yes, we did plant into the duff piles. Let me just see if I've got that offhand on what the response was. It was actually quite well. The duff piles were something the first year we went back, and this is why we're such proponents of that long-term monitoring. First year we went back after treatment, the duff piles did not look great. They were very sad looking, not great. The second year we went back out, so this July, things were great. The moisture levels were right back up. The vegetation was responding. Things were great. I'm just not seeing, I don't have the numbers on that, but that's definitely something that I know Jesse deals more with that part of the vegetation monitoring, and whoever that was that had that question, they can definitely follow up.
Great. The next question, there's two that are related. So I'll read the shorter one first and then the more kind of detailed version of it, I think. Yeah, so what is your vision for scaling up to treat meaningful amounts of features? And then related to that, it's great to see some learnings and testing here. I'm wondering how you're feeling about being able to treat hundreds of thousands of kilometers of lines in a reasonable time frame for caribou, particularly in the face of continued disturbance.
Yeah, so that's the one thing that we've been talking about a lot. And so obviously the vision, already we're looking at scaling up this winter. So basically going from one hoe to two teams, that alone is effectively going to double right there. But I think it comes down to picking the right areas to restore. So that's the problem, is that there is hundreds and thousands of kilometers of lines, but not all the lines need to be restored because we don't have enough time or money. So that's where it really comes to doing that prioritization work and figuring out where's the most important area right now to do this work. And then, what's the B and C areas that maybe once we tackle the most priority areas, we can get to these other ones. So I think that's the problem too, is just the timeline of it took, Fort Nelson's been being explored since the 50s for oil and gas. So you think how many years that was of development and destruction to kind of get here. It's unrealistic. I think humans like to think of, I'm going to solve the problem right now. It took that many years to disturb it. It's going to take that many more to restore it. So putting a realistic lens on it, and it's not something that industry and government like to think about because they want to be able to solve the problem quickly. All you can do is set up the process to start that, and then hopefully as development continues to happen, is that when you develop that, you should be also putting money into restoration and more meaningful money into more meaningful areas for restoration.
Great, thank you. And there's another question that kind of ties right into that, and it's, what else besides line intersections did you target? For example, primary prey or wolf occupancy, uplands versus lowlands, etc.
Yeah, so unfortunately we don't have a lot of the more current wolf data, and the collaring was on a very small subset. So we weren't able to look at that. But what we were able to target, besides obviously the intersection, was some of that upland to lowland transition periods. We saw, ease of treatment is great there. you're getting a little bit more diversity in the habitat types, you're getting a little bit larger trees, sometimes the ground's a little bit firmer so you can get around better. So we were really looking at some of these areas, especially in the Cacho Lake. There's a very clear band that runs north-south that kind of runs up out of the muskeg into the more upland habitat. So we did focus a lot of treatment on that for cutting off access, line of sight, things like that.
Fantastic, thank you. The next question here is, what is the objective for falling and hinging trees onto the line?
So the objective there and where we were going with that was basically a line of sight, but also black spruce can still generally grow more when you push them over. And so they should be producing basically a natural fence line. What we found, and so a lot of the conversation kind of around restoration right now with some of the other people we've been talking to is that, hinging should work and it looks good. And the first year, and this then comes back to monitoring, is the first year results were things are great, trees are still growing, putting on new growth, creating this living fence. When we went back to monitor this year, we did not see that. So going forward, we've abandoned the idea of hinging. I think you could still do hinging right, but it needs to be done in exactly the right amount of period of the season and done correctly, or else, unfortunately, they just can't keep living. But we have seen success in tree more like a bending and pushing over, which still creates a line of sight, but also keeps enough root growth in the ground that it keeps growing.
Fantastic.
And so I guess just on that too, is we were able to go back to a project that we had been contracted to do a number of years, probably about 8 years ago now, which was a big hinging project, and that monitoring work happened this spring or the summer as well. And we did see the same effects there, that unfortunately it just doesn't work that well. And I don't know if that's something, specific only to Fort Nelson, or if other people are starting to see that hinging's maybe not the best technique.
Right, okay, thank you. The next one, there's again 2 that are kind of related, so I'm going to combine them a little bit. It looks like there's been an increase in both wolf and wolverine in the KLRA aerial survey areas over time, which I think is counter to what you'd expect from effective restoration. Can you talk about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, Jesse would be the better one to talk about that. But I think, if anything, it highlights to the fact that more data is needed. These are just snapshots of one-day flights throughout, a period of 3 years or so, or 2 years. When we talk to community members, because that is something that we keep track of just in, our member observation is, what are the wolverine populations doing? Where are they kind of moving? They've identified this area as not a key area where they're seeing a lot of the wolf population growth. And it really comes down to as well is when you're doing these, you don't know if that track that you've seen is one pack, is that 2 different packs, is it 3 animals, is it 10 animals? So that's the problem too, is it's very rare to actually see the wolves and wolverines themselves. With that, there is a well-used trapping line trail within the KLRA, and one of the wolverine observation was on that skidooed kind of trap line trail, which is just part of it, and something that we do need to just respect, that there's the trapping there, which there's active trapping, which should lead to kind of that hopefully plane of keeping the wolverine and wolf population under check as well.
Sure thing. Okay, and then there's at least 2 more left here, and we've still got time, so it's good. The next question is more about the actual methods of restoration again, and is there specific rationale for not using a classic inverted mound?
Yeah, we wanted to try something different because we have not seen the desired results up in Fort Nelson with that technique yet. We just wanted to try our own approach rather than what the general population's doing. Our thinking is if you don't try something new, how are you going to know?
Fair enough. Okay, thank you. And then more generally, do you think there is a risk of having aesthetic criteria creep into our treatment plans?
I think the word aesthetic criteria, and I think that's the problem, is when you don't when you're not out there as a holistic user as the land. I think that question, when you talk to a First Nation, comes a little bit different when you're looking at, when we're talking about a more softer feel, is how it feels when you restore. So you want to take a softer approach with the land, and I think that's why too, even coming down to using the smaller equipment, the smaller touches is having, I wouldn't necessarily call it an aesthetic feel to how the line looks, it's a feeling to the line. When you're there, it looks more natural and it feels more natural than say if you're going from just a non quote unquote aesthetic look and just more into like the industrial heavy restoration. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but.
Okay, thank you. This kind of actually also feeds into that answer. So you spoke about wanting to have a light touch to consider the other species in the area like moose, but generally areas that are good for moose aren't good for caribou because of the shared predator. So I'm wondering if you and your team have considered how to reconcile that trade-off.
We have, and so the Cottrell Lake is a very different area compared to the other areas. So here you find moose and caribou use on the same lines, the same time. There's, and it is something that the members have talked about for a long time, is that co-living by moose and caribou. And I think it's something that hasn't been looked at in the Fort Nelson context. So there's a lot of, data and stuff maybe further south. But when you're up here and you notice just kind of the low value of some of the habitat for large areas, is that these animals have to make use together. So it's something that we've thought about, but that comes with the holistic approach too, is if we do something for one, we don't want to have a negative impact on another. We need to respect that both animals are coexisting on the same landscape. And I think we as humans are not the best wildlife managers, and we've already, done so much disturbing and reworking of how things work that really the community wants to see both populations prosper, because we do have a moose health population decline up here as well, and that's something that the members have noticed. And so they haven't hunted caribou themselves for a number of years. They put themselves on a self-moratorium because they saw the population declines, and now they're starting to see that with the moose. So they really want to make sure that restoration is restoration of the land and of all the values, not one singular value.
Okay, thank you for that.
I don't know if you can hear me, but this is Susan Leech. I'm just going to jump in a little bit and add to two of the responses that Katherine provided. One is that if you look at the wildlife camera data, the wolf numbers are actually quite low in the core area where we're doing restoration. So we take this as a really good sign that restoration in that area will continue to kind of keep that area from becoming heavily trafficked by wolves. So, I mean, you do see anecdotally wolf use immediately after caribou use in along some of the lines, and we are seeing still a fairly low calf survival, but I think we still have a situation here where we don't have the populations of wolves really out of kind of out of whack for what you would expect to see in this area, and that's really promising, because I think that we're here early enough to actually be able to have some affect some change or see some improvement in survival through the habitat response. So that was one response I wanted to provide. And then the other, that was in response to, I think someone asked about wolf and wolverine numbers, which again, Katherine said that we don't really have enough data from the overflights at this point. We don't have enough years of continuous data to know if we're seeing any really meaningful changes in the trends in those numbers. And then on the aesthetics side, that question, I just wanted to make sure that it was really clear that this is, by taking this holistic approach, FNFN is not ignoring the other values that are important. So, you know, there's still the desire, the response to see the visual blocking of the line and all of those characters, the vegetation, height, growth, all those things that we are considering important from a restoration perspective. We're just trying to do it in a way that also respects the holistic perspective of what a restored area should look like. And this is a really important, I've understood from talking to knowledge holders that this is a really important factor that doesn't get necessarily brought in when we're looking at doing things at an industrial scale. So integrating the cultural perspective is a key part of what FNFN is doing here without sacrificing the other outcomes that we're trying to achieve.
Great, thank you very much, Susan, for adding that. That's very helpful. Okay, with that, there's time for one more question, I think, here. And again, we have two that kind of tie in together, so I'll do that. And the first question is, do you think a proper inventory of linear features, both the location and vegetation status across Boreal BC, is important for moving forward? And then the kind of more pointed question that follows that is, in developing a 3D model of the habitat along lines with drones that you were talking about, are you also collecting LiDAR imagery?
So yeah, I guess when it comes to inventory of kind of all the seismic lines, to start with a better starting, probably not. Just knowing the cost of that, unfortunately, is not small. And I think the other thing too is that we don't need to know the status of all lines everywhere. So it really comes back to that priority of where do we want to focus our restoration dollars, as well as, you know, thinking of the drone work. I'm seeing that as maybe a happy medium. When it comes to LiDAR, obviously it's something that would be great, but as a nation, there is just no way that we would be able to afford that. And it is frustrating because a lot of the territory has been flown by oil and gas when they were here. But I mean, to try and get that data at a cost that, you know, is close to something that the nation could afford is unrealistic, unfortunately. But, you know, it's just frustrating to know that a lot of that data is out there.
Right, so would having access to those data be helpful, I guess? If those data already exist, then you have the vegetation status.
Exactly, and that would definitely cut down a large part of the planning process, is this work around which lines, what are they doing already, because the last thing you want to do is reopen or go down a line that has good vegetation, you know, growing back naturally. So if that access to that data was available, definitely it would basically move things a lot quicker, and then also save more money to do more restoration.
Right, for sure. Okay, well, we're out of time here. There are still a few questions left in the chat section. So if we didn't get to your question today, I'm so sorry about that, but I do encourage you to contact Katherine, Jesse, or Susan. All of their emails are here on the screen, so you can feel free to follow up with them directly, or you can also email the webinar series and we can put you in touch. So with that, I'd like to say thank you so much, Catherine and Susan as well, for chiming in, and thank you to the audience for joining us. Today's webinar will be posted online, and we'll see you back in 2 weeks. Thank you so much, and goodbye, everyone.